So the Tucker Carlson interview with Vladimir Putin is out, and to be honest, 2 hours long, mostly big old waste of time. But there's one key thing I'd like to share with you guys before I go on. Remember that if you enjoy the content, do subscribe to the channel. That really helps out, especially given that YouTube is not really fond of the kind of topics I cover here. If you want to prepare for what's happening already and what's coming, you have Surviving the Economic Collapse and Street Survival Skills, my books, which are available in the links there below. Let's get right to this and listen to what Vladimir Putin had to say. A couple things. 2 hour long interview. It's not really an interview. This is definitely something that was agreed upon, question after question, and every talking point, and the things that he would be allowed to ask about, and the things this is mostly a promotional piece for Vladimir Putin, which, you know, I guess it works for Tucker Carlson. 1 million subscribers, that's nice, but Tucker Carlson is no longer the man that he was when he was the figure of Fox. That's simply the way it is. You know, we would like to think that, no, you can go on. No, especially for someone like Carlson, especially for the audience that he had in Fox. It's not your YouTuber. It's not your Joe Rogan viewer. The guy that was watching Tucker Carlson in Fox, probably most of those stayed around watching whatever else Fox had to offer. But listen to what, and by the way, 2 hour long, in which Vladimir Putin goes through the same talking points as always. He talks about how in the 1600s, Russia and Ukraine, it really is the same old thing as he has talked so many times about how 500 years ago, 600 years ago, everything was Russian, and how Russia is awesome, and how the West is horrible and US bad. You would expect that sort of thing. He even says that, yes, we try to have Tucker Carlson at the end of the interview. Yes, could there be peace? Or we try doing that, he said. So basically saying, no, we have no interest in giving up anything, and we'll keep fighting for as long as we can so as to grab as much as we can of Ukraine. But this part here is quite interesting. Listen to what he has to say.
Remedied.
Well, let's just give one example, the US dollar, which has kind of united the world in a lot of ways, maybe not to your advantage, but certainly to ours. Is that going away as the reserve currency, the universally accepted currency? How have sanctions, do you think, changed the dollar's place in the world?
You know, to use the dollar as a tool of foreign...
It's as if the questions were written by Putin himself, right? They probably said, okay, you can ask this, all right? You ask us this about it. And the way in which he's constantly laughing and peddling to Putin is a little bit embarrassing, a little bit not too masculine, kind of like very, yeah, a little bit shameful. But he does that throughout the interview. He's constantly trying to get the approval and little jokes, and you can definitely tell where loyalties of Tucker Carlson lie. And it's not with the United States. I'm not talking about the Biden administration. I'm talking about a direct enemy of the United States, which is this man, Vladimir Putin. Russia is a direct enemy of the United States people. It's not just the current administration. Even if Trump wins, this man will still be enemy of the United States, as Russia has been historically for a number of years. This should not be a surprise. I'm still surprised by how many people still don't quite put together how you can be very patriotic American if you are against the United States interests. Not the administration, but the U.S. in its in its complete form. This guy would like nothing more than to see the U.S. fall apart, and that's what they're basically talking about all the time. Now, talking about the U.S. dollar, Tucker Carlson does accurately say that, yes, it is the currency used by the entire world, right? So how is this going to be affected by the BRICS, the up-and-coming new currency that the world will use to replace the U.S. dollar?
Policy struggle is one of the biggest strategic mistakes made by the U.S. political leadership.
Saying that imposing the US dollar as the currency for the entire world is a strategic mistake. Yeah, I don't think the man is a complete idiot. I don't think Vladimir Putin is a fool. So he's just saying things he wish were true. No, it's not. It is, in fact, the greatest power, along with its military, in which it uses to impose the US dollar on everyone else. But having the currency that the entire world uses while you are the one that gets to print it, that is your greatest power, bar none. That is by far the greatest influence, the greatest power, the greatest leverage you have with the entire world. It's not a strategic mistake like Putin here is saying.
The dollar is the cornerstone of the United States power.
Right.
I think everyone understands very well that no matter how many dollars are printed, they are quickly dispersed all over the world.
That fucking face of Tucker Carlson is like... I would love to know how much is he getting out of this. That would be an interesting number to know, because so many years, that is expensive, man. That is not cheap.
Inflation in the United States is minimal. It's about 3 or 3.4%, which is, I think, totally acceptable for the US.
And this is where he kind of loses me, because here he's not pretending to be... He's talking as if it's real, as if 3-4%. Doesn't this man know that that is not the true inflation of the United States? So he gets it wrong when he says that it's a mistake. Then he says it's the cornerstone of the power. So which one is it? Is it the biggest strategic mistake ever, or is it the cornerstone of the power of the United States over the world? It cannot be both. Either it's a big mistake or it is your greatest asset. And then he goes about this in terms of, well, inflation is not so bad in the United States. Yes, it fucking is. It's actually terrible. It's not 3 or 4%. No one believes that. No one that buys anything in the United States in the last couple of years thinks the inflation is 3-4%. That is just a huge lie, which, yes, governments do lie. The US government lies all the time. All governments do. But specifically regarding this, inflation in the United States is not 3 or 4%. It's closer maybe to 20. And it's not affecting everyone equally. If you are extremely wealthy, in fact, it affects you a lot less than if you are an average person that needs to buy food, building materials, pay bills. That is going to be hitting you a lot harder. I mean, there's things that have doubled in price. So it is much closer for the average American to say that inflation is 15, 20, or even greater, depending on exactly what kind of expenses you have, than saying 3-4%. That is simply not true. And apparently he is not aware of that, or he hasn't got the memo, or then he goes about how, well, this is something that the entire world is going to be turning away from and replacing it with the BRICS.
But they won't stop printing. What does the debt of $33 trillion tell us about? It is about the emission. Nevertheless, it is the main weapon used by the United States to preserve its power across the world. As soon as the political leadership decided to use the US dollar as a tool of political struggle, a blow was dealt to this American power.
How?
I would not like to use any strong language, but it is a stupid thing to do and a grave mistake.
I'm not taking anything out of context. You listen to the man keep repeating it's the greatest mistake. You would assume he would explain in what way is it a huge, massive, big-ass mistake to have so much power over the economy of the world. He never clarifies that, as you see.
Look at what is going on in the world. Even the United States allies are now downsizing their dollar reserves. Seeing this, everyone starts looking for ways to protect themselves. But the fact that the United States applies restrictive measures to certain countries, such as placing restrictions on transactions, freezing assets.
So you see, there's no broader context. He says it's a massive mistake, and then he says because they're downsizing. Well, yes, the United States is printing enormous amounts of money, And they justify that with wars, they justify that with pandemic, they justify that with a number of excuses popular in the media. The reality is that the more money they print for themselves, the richer they get. The elite gets richer the more money they print and give themselves through different contracts, through different excuses, through little mechanisms. But at the end of the day, it is still by far the prevalent, most powerful currency in the world, and that's what the rest of the world uses. Now, he kind of tries to make the argument that, well, with sanctions, the world sees that the US dollar cannot be trusted. I have done videos before about how BRICS, the BRIC currency is slowly, little by little, trying to gain, but it's nowhere in comparison to the US dollar. And the reason for that is simply this, which is Russia really doesn't matter a whole damn lot. The world's largest economy by far is the United States. Then you have China. And this graphic is quite telling. US, China, Germany, Japan, India, UK, France, Italy, Brazil, Canada. There's not even mention here of Russia because Russia is in number... Well, there you go. Russia's economy is smaller than the Canadians' economy and about the same size as Mexico. That's the leverage Russia has over the world. That's the leverage Russia has over the US dollar, the same leverage that Mexico has, with obviously the difference of Russia being a pretty large military power that actually got quite exposed with the war in Ukraine by not being able to defeat impoverished former Soviet satellite nation like Ukraine. Yes, with help from abroad for sure, but really not a whole lot more than that, and really not nearly as much help as they could have given it. If they had really supported Ukraine, Russia would have had its ass beaten in a matter of weeks. There's no doubt about that. Look at what's happening in terms of Israel, the kind of support and leverage they got with fucking Gaza. Imagine that kind of compromise to support a country. Well, just giving them a few weapons, and even those limiting the software so as to have a reduced range of firing, it is ridiculous. And still, the war is raging, and the territory that they occupied in the first few days has been pulled back, and it's back to 2014. It is a mess, but it's definitely not some massive, huge victory for Russia. So the man just tries to present his point, and I get it. He is Vladimir Putin. He has his Soviet ambitions of power, and in his later days, he decided to go for it, and it ended up in this fucking disaster of a mess. But 2 hours long of historical revisionism of how things would have been in the 1600s, how NATO is bad and was getting closer to his borders, and all of that crap that we've heard from him so many times before. I think that the clue here is that he is not really all that aware of what's going on. Either that, or he just does not want to acknowledge it, which I would also understand. He has his position, and the West has its own, and there's really not going to be much of a compromise. He definitely has no intentions of reaching any kind of peace and negotiation, because that would involve just not invading the country anymore that he's currently invading, which he really, really wants to continue doing. So that's basically it, guys. Just prepare for what's happening all over the world. I will do a separate video about some of the true concerns that we all should have in terms of the global economy, the US dollar, how things are going. And it's not going well, not because of Vladimir Putin, but because of other factors, other players that we should be aware of, and it's not being talked about nearly as much as it should in the mainstream media. See you next time.